So we're here to talk a little bit about your book as well, The Giving Game. So tell us what inspired you to write the book and what the title means to you, both professionally and personally.
Sure. So what kind of inspired me to write the book? So I mentioned earlier that my parents were, coaches, and we kind of made the taking of my sister kind of the family's work. So just a lot of service and a lot of just kind of giving of self. And as a kid, full transparency, I often didn't want to, but then it was kind of just, we learned how to do that. And then early in my career, I had some people that I worked for in Chicago. I, worked for a couple at a gallery called Mars Gallery, and they saw something in me, and they took a big risk in hiring me. I didn't have a background in art history, really no sales experience, but they saw something in me and they took a chance. And they were very generous, and they gave me this big opportunity, and they trained me, and they saw something, as I said, that they liked in me. And then they really took the time to develop me and kind of groom me to being a sales director for their galleries. And then that happened to me again in New York when I was left Wall Street and went to trade publishing. I worked for this guy by the name of Bob Sherwood, and he, again, saw something in me that, that I did not see in myself. And he saw someone who could actually be on stage and could actually kind of facilitate large sessions and could engage large groups of people. And through something he delegated to me, he kind of challenged me to see myself differently. And had he not done that, and I talk about it in the book, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. I certainly wouldn't be here talking to you. So he kind of, in this idea of it, he kind of gave me the opportunity. Yes, he got something out of it, but he really kind of fundamentally changed, the trajectory of my career. So those were always kind of percolating in the back of my mind. And I always thought about, as a leader, how I wanted to kind of work with my team, and this idea of like, okay, people seem to do well when they kind of put the needs of others first. So that was something I just noticed through my parents and their coaching and their family and these early bosses I had, and then in my business at the Turk Group, the majority of the work that we do with clients is around leadership, and it's leadership at all levels. And probably 50% of the leadership sessions we run are leaders who are new to role. So they're people who have recently been promoted, or they are kind of part of a high potential cohort, and we're grooming them to go into people leadership roles. Or there are people who have been in role for a long time and had never had the training. So I was, at a certain point in the L&D space, as a coach, as a kind of owner of a firm, you write a book. So I was like, oh, if I wrote a book, what would it be? So I'm like, I like this idea of service, this idea of a giving game, and kind of bringing a little bit of levity to this idea of working, and what's needed in the market. And then I looked at these kind of new managers, and the clients we work with have budget, so they're able to hire us to come in and run formal training programs and coaching programs. But there's a lot of startups out there. There's a lot of smaller organizations, or organizations that just don't invest in L&D. I'm like, what about those people? They would be well served to have at least some ideas on what they should do if they are recently promoted, or they've done it for a long time and have just been winging it. So let me be of service to that group. So these people who may or may not be able to afford the training, but can certainly buy a book, let me provide for them, just based on my experience through 25 years plus in the space, what I think they should do to increase the likelihood that they will succeed. So the book is really this idea of kind of bringing them through the first year of being a people manager. So some tips, some tricks, some tools, some things to avoid, and that's really kind of what the book was born on. And then the name of the book, The Giving Game, becoming the leader that others want to follow. It's just really kind of putting others' needs first. Most of the time is going to create a good environment where people will be inspired and will probably perform at their best.
Yeah. And so just building on that, from your experience working with leaders, managers across various industries, what are some of the most common challenges that new managers face when they're transitioning, focusing on their own performance to managing the performance and the morale of others?
Yeah, so first of all, kind of even bigger than that, just like leading today, is very difficult. So there's coming out of the pandemic and geopolitical and kind of the tariffs. It's very, very challenging to keep people focused and motivated because there's so many stimuli, there's so much stimulus coming at people from all fronts, right? So it's just a tough time to be a leader of people because you have to create space for them to be able to process all of that and still be able to focus. In addition to that, so you mentioned it just quite succinctly there. So going from kind of managing self to managing others is probably going to be the biggest shift that we go through as people leaders, because fundamentally it's completely different. So kind of my values, my time, my skills, all of those need to change. No longer is my kind of my values happening through the quality of my work and kind of my own innovation. Now I need to kind of value creating that through other people and seeing their success as my own success, etc. So as leaders transition, the biggest kind of pitfall that they fall into is thinking that what got them there will keep them there. So understanding that it is a shift and there are different skills required, really understanding that and really building a plan for those new skills. What I see the biggest trap is people don't think that they can admit that they don't know what they're doing, so they don't. So they just sort of hunker down, and what ends up happening is they do the stuff that they were really good at as an individual contributor, which is often the responsibility of their team. So kind of irritating the people that report to them and bogging them down when their bosses need them to be doing things that are more strategic. So that's kind of like the new manager trap, and understandable, but not sustainable and not productive. So that's probably the biggest one.
Mm-hmm. So then how can someone develop the skills and those qualities to navigate the shift?
No, it's great. So I think we reference this in the book. There's a book called the Leadership Pipeline, and it is a book that really goes through the different junctures of leadership. So going from individual contributor to team lead to kind of group manager, functional lead, all the way up to enterprise. And it talks about the different skills you need in each one of those kind of junctures. So the first thing that we suggest in the book, we talk about this idea of the importance of the first 45, and we have a kind of an F45 playbook that really focuses in on that. And the first thing is just understand like what the differences are and do some type of gap analysis. Like, okay, here are the requirements of me as a people leader. I need to get feedback. I need to be able to coach. I need to understand performance management. I may have budgetary responsibilities, and here's my knowledge and experience with those things. And if I have it, great, leverage it. If I don't, understand it, and what's my plan to actually go out and learn those things. And the good news today, there's like LinkedIn Learning, there's TED Talks, there's this podcast, there's all sorts of things where people can go out and really self-direct the knowledge. Hopefully they have a good boss and they can go to their boss to say like, I'm comfortable in these areas. I really need your help here. What do you have? Right. So really self-awareness, and then the kind of the self-regulation to be able to kind of close the gap as quickly as they can.
Yeah. And you mentioned those first 45 days, those critical first 5 days, starting off your leadership manager journey on that right foot. Why are the first 45 days so important?
Because you want to start strong, and like when you're new to role, especially if you were kind of hired from your peer group at the organization, so people are looking, or if you're coming in from another organization, people are going to be very open, but very quickly they're going to be kind of sizing you up to figure out like, is this person going to be the right fit or not? So you want to start strong, right? So you don't want to just kick back. And there was a time when people would really like take 6 months to get themselves like really to a point where they're kind of really adding value. In the world we live in today, it's way too dynamic. Change is so constant, and things are just moving too quickly. You need to kind of just really kind of establish yourself as quickly as possible. So in the first 45 days, we break it into really 3 phases. First couple of weeks is just get your head in the game. What's the organization? Who's the executive team? What's our go-to-market strategy? who are the players on my team? What are, get to know them a little bit. So have some conversations. What I said just a few minutes ago, as far as like really understand what your job description is. And so like, in just like, you got the job, so you're able to speak to a lot of these things, but can you actually do these things? And it's okay, but just be, honest about it. And then, make sure that you are clear around what your requirements are via the job description. And then make sure you just align yourself with your boss. Like, okay, big picture, what are my kind of 2 or 3 priorities here? What do you want me to focus in on the first like couple of weeks here? So let them kind of provide that. The second 2 weeks of phase 2, so weeks 3 and 4, is really a chance to, by this time you would have gotten to know your team a little bit. You kind of understand the organization. You have a pretty good sense for what the role entails. Now you want to kind of think horizontally across the organization. So rarely are you and your team going to be working in a silo. So what are the dependencies? What are the partnerships? So so are you handing work product off to engineering, or are you receiving something from marketing? To really understand kind of what are the different touch points within the work of your team, and then go out and do some, contracting with the different stakeholders around, let's talk about how our teams are working together. I'm new to role. I would love to hear from your perspective, what's working, what's not. If we could do something differently, what would you like us to do? I checked with my team last week. Here's how we're seeing things. So go in and just very quickly, do a needs assessment. Don't overpromise, but just get your head in the game around kind of how it's going with working with other people. Typically, I would include not only kind of peer managers and functions, but probably vendors. So if there's any vendor relationships, as well as just senior leaders, or they're like really important senior leaders that you need to start establishing the familiarity with, and maybe even a relationship with, kind of identify who those are. And then we finish out the 45 days with kind of weeks 5 and 6 being like, now that you've kind of collected all this information, you should be able to start really kind of thinking about the kind of the vision and mission of your team. Now that you understand, and how is it contributing to the organization's strategy? You've talked to your stakeholders, you've talked to your team. Now you're really ready to start kind of shaping how you see this all moving forward. How the team needs to work together. Along the way, you'll want to kind of look for some quick wins. So if there's, if the team's grumbling about the team meeting happening too early on a Monday, change it. Push it back a half hour. So just pay attention. Look for quick wins. And the first 45 days, it's not perfect, but our experience is that if you do those things, chances are you'll be off on the right track.